My name is Camille Rivers. I was born and raised in the quiet town of Brookfield, Illinois, a place where the grass was always trimmed, neighbors waved from their porches, and birthday banners were reused between siblings to save money. From the outside, our family looked perfectly balanced: 2 daughters, 2 working parents, a brick home with sunflowers planted under the windows. But inside, everything leaned in one direction. I was the eldest, the rule follower, the self-starter. The one who learned to tie her shoes and file taxes before my younger sister ever had to load a dishwasher. My parents, Carla and Dennis Rivers, were not cruel. They just played favorites with such subtlety that for years, I mistook it for fairness. "Morgan's just sensitive," they'd say. "She needs more attention. You're the independent one." That became my identity. Camille, the strong one. Camille, who doesn't need praise or celebration. Camille, who sacrifices quietly and never asks for more. I told myself that being needed was enough. That strength didn't come with applause. But even strength, when starved of recognition, begins to fracture. I didn't know it yet, but the party my mother planned, one I funded to mark the greatest achievement of my life, would become the moment that shattered everything I once believed about family. By the time I turned 28, I had built a career from the ground up. No shortcuts. No second chances. I worked through college while managing a part-time job at a dry cleaner, often studying under the hum of industrial dryers. After graduation, I landed a junior analyst position at a small real estate firm in Chicago, where I stayed late, said yes to every task, and worked twice as hard to be noticed half as often. My parents knew I was climbing. They saw the effort. But while they shared Morgan's TikToks on Facebook and bragged about her modeling gigs, even the unpaid ones, they rarely asked what my job entailed. I stopped offering updates. Instead, I let my work speak for itself. And when the promotion came, I nearly didn't believe it. Vice President of Regional Strategy at one of the most competitive firms in the Midwest. A 6-figure salary. A corner office. It wasn't just a title, it was a culmination of every missed holiday, every late-night grind, every time I chose progress over comfort. I called my mom, voice shaking with joy. "Mom, I did it. I got the promotion." She paused, then said, "Wow. That's great, honey. You should celebrate. Maybe we can throw something at the house." I hesitated. We hadn't hosted anything together in years. But part of me, deep down, wanted to believe this time would be different. That maybe, just maybe, I'd finally get a moment in the sun. I transferred $4,000 to my mother's account the next day. "This should cover everything," I texted. "Venue, food, whatever you need." She replied with a heart emoji and the words, "So proud of you." For a week, I didn't hear much. No menu updates. No guest list. Just the occasional "working on it" message. I told myself not to be anxious. I focused on work, on booking my first leadership conference, on ordering a suit tailored for the occasion. The day of the party, I pulled up to my parents' house, heart full. The driveway was full of cars. The porch was decorated with fairy lights and pink roses, my sister's favorite. I paused. Roses. My mom knew I didn't like them. Maybe it was just a decoration choice. I walked in, smiling, ready to be surprised. And I was, but not the way I hoped. There were banners, all right. But they didn't read "Congratulations, Camille." They read "Celebrating Morgan's Journey." A large photo collage of Morgan modeling stood near the punch bowl. She was glowing, in a sparkly dress, standing next to her boyfriend who I didn't even know was coming. I found my mom near the kitchen, beaming. "Look who made it," she said, pointing at Morgan. "Isn't she stunning?" I looked around. My co-workers were there. My grandparents. But the music, the photos, the cake, it all screamed Morgan. I whispered, "Mom, what's going on?" She said without hesitation, "We thought we'd celebrate you both. But Morgan just got signed by an agency, how could we not highlight that?" It hit me like a punch to the gut. I paid for my own erasure. I stood frozen in the hallway, the thrum of conversation and clinking glasses blurring around me like static. The night that was supposed to celebrate a life-changing promotion, my promotion, had become a runway for Morgan's next phase. I looked toward the dining table. The cake I'd funded was decorated with 2 new chapters in cursive gold frosting. My name wasn't on it. There was a slideshow playing on the living room TV, a loop of Morgan's modeling photos, most of them selfies, some professional, all curated to perfection. My Aunt Marcia leaned over to my grandmother and whispered, "She's just so natural in front of a camera, isn't she?" My grandmother smiled politely, clearly confused. She had brought a gift wrapped in gold paper with a card that said, "Congratulations, Camille." I caught her eye. Her brows knit slightly, then she glanced around. I didn't need to explain. She could see it. Everyone could. I was the guest at a party I'd paid for. And it wasn't just about the photos or the cake, it was about the silence. No one had said my name once. Not a single toast. Not one mention of the position I worked for, bled for. I found my mother by the patio doors, laughing with her friends about Morgan's agency signing. I waited until the conversation dipped. "Can I talk to you for a second?" I asked. She turned to me, mildly annoyed, wineglass in hand. "What is it?" "This was supposed to be for my promotion," I said quietly. "You told me you'd plan something for me." She blinked, lips pursing like she hadn't considered how it would feel to be sidelined. "We are celebrating you, Camille," she said. "Everyone's here, aren't they?" "But no one knows why," I said. "Because you didn't tell them." She rolled her eyes. "Why are you being so sensitive?" I swallowed my response, the burn in my chest rising. Morgan appeared behind her, all teeth and red lipstick, laughing with someone I didn't recognize. She was radiant. As always. And yet I felt nothing but tired. Tired of pretending this was okay. Tired of being told to swallow things whole, like disappointment was part of my DNA. My father walked over then, clapping me on the back with forced cheer. "We're proud of you too, kiddo," he said, like he'd heard my voice from across the room. "Just let Morgan have her moment. You know she struggles with confidence." I blinked. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask if anyone had ever thought about my confidence. Instead, I nodded and walked away. I wandered to the edge of the crowd, watching guests eat from the buffet I'd paid for. My co-workers looked uneasy, glancing around as if waiting for anything, to suggest this wasn't a modeling celebration. I saw Lauren, my closest friend from the office, standing near the drink table. She walked over, holding 2 flutes of champagne. "Camille," she said softly, "isn't this your night?" I gave a short, bitter laugh. "Apparently, it's everyone's but mine." She handed me a glass. "You're not going to just stand here and let it slide, are you?" I didn't answer. My heart was racing. I could hear my mother's voice booming again from the staircase. "Let's all raise a glass for Morgan and Andrew's next big adventure." Guests clapped. My mother smiled wide. Morgan waved and did a playful twirl in her red dress. I looked down at the champagne in my hand. I wasn't mad at Morgan. Not really. She had always done what she was allowed to do. The problem was, no one ever told her no. And they never told me yes. I took a slow breath. My fingers tightened around the glass. And then I walked to the front of the room. I raised my hand gently. "Excuse me. Just a moment." The room quieted. Morgan turned. My mom's smile faltered. My dad shifted beside her, lips pressed tight. I stood straight, cleared my throat, and said, "I want to thank everyone for coming. I know tonight has been surprising for many of you." A few murmurs. I scanned the crowd. This gathering was originally planned to celebrate a promotion I received last month. Vice President of Regional Strategy at Langston and Whitaker. I paused. I sent the money for the decorations, the catering, the music. My mother agreed to help coordinate. But apparently, somewhere along the line, the theme shifted. Morgan's face dropped. "Camille," she whispered, but I didn't stop. "I'm happy for my sister. I truly am. But I will not stand quietly while my own achievement is buried beneath someone else's spotlight again. Not tonight." The room went still. I raised my glass higher. "To everyone who's ever been asked to shrink for someone else's comfort, don't." I took a sip and set the glass down. And just like that, I walked out. I didn't storm out. I didn't slam a door. I didn't break down crying or throw the champagne glass, even though a part of me wanted to. I just turned around and walked away like someone who had finally let go of carrying an entire family's comfort on her back. The air outside was cooler than I expected, a breeze pushing through the trees lining my parents' yard. I could still hear muffled voices behind me, some murmuring, some gasping. But the moment I crossed that front door, everything felt quiet inside me. Not empty, just still. For the first time in years. I made it to my car, opened the door, and sat in the driver's seat without turning the engine on. Just breathing. I didn't even know what I felt. Was it relief? Pain? Power? Maybe all of it at once. Then I saw the front door open in my rearview mirror. Morgan stepped outside, heels clicking against the pavement like thunder. "Camille," she called. I didn't respond. She came around to the passenger side and yanked the door open. "What was that?" she hissed. "You embarrassed me." I looked at her calmly. "No. I embarrassed the system that's always centered you while silencing me. This wasn't about you," she snapped. "It was just a moment. You couldn't let me have that. You always act like a victim." My hands tightened around the steering wheel. "Morgan, I paid for that party. It was for my promotion. You hijacked it and didn't even have the decency to tell me. I stood in that house, surrounded by people I invited, and you treated me like an afterthought." Again. Her eyes widened. "It wasn't meant to be like that. Mom just thought, Mom always thinks I should make space for you. And I did. My whole life." She blinked at me like I had spoken a foreign language. "You know what your problem is," she said, her voice trembling. "You think everything has to be equal. But not everything is about fairness. Sometimes people just like me more. Maybe I'm easier to celebrate." That cut deeper than she knew. I swallowed hard. Maybe. But being easy to celebrate doesn't make you more worthy. I reached over and shut the passenger door softly. "Go back inside, Morgan. Enjoy your night. You earned everyone's attention. But you didn't earn my silence." I pulled out of the driveway and didn't look back. My phone vibrated in the console, but I didn't touch it. I drove straight to my apartment, parking under the dim garage light and sitting for a moment in the stillness. I thought about calling Lauren. I thought about texting my grandmother. But I didn't. I just went inside, kicked off my shoes, and dropped my purse on the floor. The room was dim, but peaceful. The kind of silence I used to be scared of. I poured myself a glass of water and sat on the edge of my bed, scrolling through the texts lighting up my screen. 5 from Mom. 2 from Dad. Morgan again. I opened Mom's first. That was unacceptable. "You ruined a perfectly good evening." Then. If you needed attention, there were better ways to ask for it. And the one that stung the most. "You made us look bad." I locked my phone and set it face down. It was never about how I felt. Only about how I made them feel. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again, but this time, it was a different name. "Grandma. I saw everything. We need to talk tomorrow. I'm proud of you." And just like that, a lump caught in my throat. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't selfish. I was just the first one in the family to say, enough. The next morning, I sat across from my grandmother at her small kitchen table, the one with the chipped edge and faded sunflower placemats she refused to replace. She poured tea like she always did, slow, careful, no wasted motion. She didn't say anything at first, and I didn't rush her. In our family, silence had always been a weapon. But with Grandma Vera, it felt more like space. A quiet invitation to exist without performance. She finally looked up and said, "I was waiting for this moment. I just didn't think it would come like that." Her voice was steady, but her eyes held something, pride and sorrow folded together. "I didn't want to cause trouble," I said. "But when I stood there last night, and nobody said my name, not even once, it felt like I was being erased in real time." She nodded, her fingers wrapping around the cup. "You weren't wrong to speak. You were just the first person brave enough to stop playing along." I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. "Did you always see it?" I asked. The way they favored Morgan? Grandma didn't flinch. Of course I did. But I thought if I stayed quiet, it wouldn't damage you. I thought you were strong enough to survive it. She paused, then reached into the drawer beside her and pulled out a small envelope. I was going through old things the other day. Found this. She handed it to me. Inside was a crumpled drawing, one I'd made when I was 7. It was of me, holding hands with 2 stick figures labeled Mom and Dad, standing in front of a house. In the background, a small baby labeled Morgan sat on a throne. I stared at it, stunned. You kept this. You gave it to me after Morgan got that playroom and your room was turned into her study. You said, Grandma, maybe if I keep drawing them happy, they'll notice me again. Her words hit like a wave. I remembered that day. I remembered sitting on her porch, watching my parents carry in new furniture for Morgan, and wondering if there was something broken inside me that made me so easy to forget. I didn't realize it started that early, I whispered. It started earlier than you remember, she said. But you didn't stop giving. That's what they took advantage of. Not just your silence, but your hope. You kept believing they'd see you if you just worked harder. That's not weakness, Camille. That's love. We sat there for a long time, letting the truth sit between us like warm air in the room. I told her things I hadn't told anyone. About the time Mom used my college savings for Morgan's travel program. About the night I got promoted to senior analyst and my parents didn't return my call because they were helping Morgan prep for an influencer meet and greet. About the birthdays spent alone while Morgan got entire dinners hosted in her honor. Grandma Vera didn't interrupt. She didn't try to justify or explain. She just listened, every now and then reaching across the table to squeeze my hand like an anchor. You always tried to earn what should have been given freely, she said. That's what breaks my heart. I nodded slowly. I think part of me always hoped that if I was good enough, successful enough, they'd finally look at me like they looked at her. They can't, she said gently. Because they've convinced themselves you didn't need it. And once people decide that, they stop giving altogether. It was strange how freeing that was to hear. Not because it excused their actions, but because it confirmed that I wasn't imagining it. I hadn't been too sensitive. I'd just been too patient. Before I left that morning, Grandma Vera stood and pulled me into a hug. Whatever happens next, she said, don't ever shrink again. They're not angry because you ruined anything. They're angry because you finally stopped letting them ignore you. I nodded, her words settling into my chest like armor. As I drove home, something shifted. The Camille who had always tried to keep the peace, to play the role of the good daughter, to be strong in silence, that version of me had walked off that stage the moment I picked up the MIC. And the woman driving home now? She wasn't going back. She wasn't waiting for an apology. She was finally building a life where she didn't have to explain her worth to people who refused to see it. Grandma had remembered everything I thought the world forgot. And somehow, that gave me permission to never forget myself again. The following week, I received a LinkedIn message from one of our firm's junior analysts. Just read the local column about your promotion. Huge congrats. You're an inspiration. Confused, I clicked the link she attached. A short piece in the Chicago Business Gazette had featured my name, my photo, and a write-up about my appointment as Vice President of Regional Strategy. I hadn't even known it went to print. The article was factual, clean, and surprisingly warm. But what stood out most was the headline, Camille Rivers, the quiet strategist who's changing the game. I stared at it for a long time, rereading each paragraph. It wasn't the attention that struck me, it was the accuracy. For once, someone had told the truth about me without twisting it through someone else's spotlight. That evening, after work, I sent the link to my parents. Not with bitterness. Not with commentary. Just a simple message. Thought you might want to know what the party was actually for. I hit send. No anger. No shaking hands. I didn't care whether they replied. It wasn't for them. It was for me. But they did reply hours later. My dad sent a short message. We're proud of you. We just didn't know how to say it right. My mom's came a little after that. Maybe I overstepped. I just thought Morgan needed a boost. I stared at the texts and said nothing. Because it wasn't about whether they were proud now, it was about how they had made me feel small for so long. The apology, if you could even call it that, wasn't really for me. It was a defense. A way to say, we didn't mean harm, without admitting how much harm had already been done. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the article to Grandma Vera. 10 minutes later, she called me, voice thick with emotion. You don't know how many times I wished the world would see what I saw in you. Now they do. That moment grounded me more than any promotion, title, or acknowledgement ever had. Someone had finally written about me without needing me to earn it first. The next day, I showed up to work with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Every room I entered, every meeting I led, it felt different. Not because I had changed, but because I'd finally stopped waiting for permission to be seen. That weekend, I got invited to speak on a Women in Leadership panel at a citywide conference. I almost declined. I wasn't sure I wanted to talk about myself. But something inside me whispered, this is your story. Stop letting other people tell it for you. I accepted. When the day came, I stood on a small stage in front of a room full of women, young professionals, mothers, students, retirees, all of them looking for something. Maybe a path. Maybe a spark. Maybe the courage to do what I finally had. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't talk about balance sheets or strategy models. I talked about value. About how sometimes, the people closest to us miss our brilliance because they're too busy feeding someone else's ego. I told them about the party. About the banners. About the moment I took the MIC and said the words I had held in for 28 years. And when I said, you don't need applause to be valid. You don't need to stay silent to be strong, the room went still. And then, they clapped. Not because I asked for it, but because they understood. That night, as I stepped off the stage, I wasn't just proud, I was free. It happened on a Wednesday night. I had just finished reviewing quarterly projections when my phone buzzed with a message that made my stomach tighten. It wasn't from my mother. It wasn't from my father. It was from Morgan. I hadn't heard a word from her since the night of the party. Not a call, not a text, not a cryptic social media post. Just silence. So when her name lit up on my screen, I paused, letting my thumb hover before opening the message. It was short, hesitant, almost unlike her. Can we talk? Just us. I stared at it for a long time. I wasn't angry. I wasn't nervous. I was just distant. Like I was looking back at an old version of myself through a thick pane of glass. I didn't know what she wanted. Closure. An apology. A reset. Part of me didn't care. But another part, the part that still carried echoes of our childhood, wanted to hear her out. Maybe not for her, but for me. So I replied. Friday. 6 p.m. My place. Not mom and dad's. If she really wanted to talk, she could come into my world for once. She arrived exactly on time. That alone surprised me. She stood at my door wearing a beige coat and minimal makeup, her shoulders tense like she had rehearsed this moment and was still unsure how it would go. I opened the door and stepped aside without a word. She walked in, glancing around my apartment with unfamiliar eyes. You've done well, she said softly. It's calm in here. I raised an eyebrow. Didn't expect calm. She smiled weakly. Didn't expect to feel like I was the one visiting someone important. I gestured to the couch. She sat down, adjusting her sleeves like a nervous kid waiting for a parent to speak. I didn't offer tea or small talk. I sat across from her, folded my hands, and waited. She took a breath, then spoke. I want to say something I should have said years ago. I didn't interrupt. I'm sorry, Camille. Not just for the party. For everything. For taking up so much space. For never asking how it made you feel. Her voice cracked. I think deep down, I knew. But it felt easier to believe I deserved it than to admit I'd been handed it without earning it. I nodded slowly, letting her words sit in the air. Why now? I asked. What changed? She looked down at her hands. That night broke something in me. Andrew left. Said he couldn't be with someone who builds a life on someone else's back. I didn't get signed by that agency. It was a trial contract, they dropped me a week later. And then the article came out. The one about you. And I realized, the spotlight doesn't mean anything if it's stolen. Her voice was small. I've never built anything real, Camille. But you have. And that's something I can't fake my way into. For a long time, I didn't say anything. Because I wasn't used to Morgan owning anything. She had always sidestepped blame, smiled her way out of conflict, cried when things got too real. But here she was raw, cracked open, not asking for forgiveness, just honesty. I'm not mad anymore, I said. But I can't go back to how things were. I'm not shrinking again. Not for you. Not for Mom. Not for anyone. She nodded. I don't expect you to. We sat there, two women raised in the same house, finally breathing in separate air. She didn't ask for comfort. I didn't offer it. But for the first time, we saw each other without the noise of comparison. You don't need to apologize again, I said finally. Just don't repeat it. Morgan's eyes welled, but she blinked the tears away. I won't, she said. I'm working on being better. Actually better. She stood slowly. Thank you for letting me in. I walked her to the door. She paused before stepping out. You've changed, she said. You used to walk like you were afraid to be seen. Now you walk like you don't care who's watching. I smiled. That's because I finally learned, I was never the problem. The room was just too small. She left without another word. And this time, I didn't feel hollow. I felt light. A month passed before the invitation came. A plain white envelope, addressed in my mother's handwriting, with a card that read, Family brunch this Sunday. Let's start fresh. No apology. No mention of what had happened. Just a new invitation to step back into the house where I'd learned to keep myself small. I didn't say yes right away. I sat with it. I looked at the card each evening like it was a test I hadn't studied for. Grandma Vera called when she heard about it. You don't have to go, she said. Not unless you're going in as yourself and not who they expect you to be. I knew what she meant. This couldn't be a repeat of every dinner table where Morgan's latest hobby was front and center and I was the background hum of responsibility. This time, if I was going back, it had to be with my spine straight and my silence left at home. So I picked out a navy jumpsuit, polished but bold. I arrived 5 minutes late. Not out of pettiness, but because I refused to rush toward a space that had once ignored me. When I stepped inside, the conversation paused like a ripple in still water. The house looked exactly the same, down to the family portraits and Morgan's framed diploma in the hallway. My parents greeted me with cautious smiles. My mother gave a light hug, her hand barely brushing my shoulder. Glad you came, she said. We weren't sure if you would. I gave her a polite nod. I wasn't either. The table was set with her usual Sunday spread, quiche, fruit salad, scones, but the seating had changed. For the first time in my memory, my name was written on the place card at the head of the table. I almost laughed. It felt theatrical, like they were trying to prove something without saying it out loud. Morgan sat to the right, quieter than usual, her hair pinned back, her makeup minimal. She didn't make a show of anything. She just offered a soft hi, and looked down. As everyone settled, my father raised a glass. Before we begin, he said, we want to acknowledge Camille's accomplishments. We didn't do that right the first time, and we see that now. My mother nodded slightly. We're proud of you, she added. And we know you've worked hard. We should have said it sooner. The words didn't sting, but they didn't heal either. They were just words. And I didn't need them like I once did. I smiled graciously. Thank you. I'm proud of me too. I let the sentence sit in the room. Not to provoke, but to declare. The rest of the brunch was quiet. Comfortable in some ways, tense in others. My parents asked questions about my job, real ones. They listened when I spoke. Morgan chimed in here and there, but mostly let the spotlight shift. I didn't feel the need to fill the silence or compete. I wasn't performing. I was just existing, finally. When it was time to leave, my mom followed me to the front porch. I know I've made mistakes, she said, eyes on the flowerbed. And I'm not asking for everything to go back to normal. I just hope we can start from here. I nodded. We can. But from here means seeing me as I am. Not who you think I should be. She didn't argue. She just nodded. I'm trying. As I got in my car and drove away, I realized something profound. I didn't need their stage anymore. Because I had built my own. And every step I took now was a standing ovation for the girl who used to whisper instead of speak. 3 weeks after the brunch, I was called into a closed-door meeting with the executive partners at Langston & Whitaker. I assumed it was just a quarterly review or another discussion about expansion markets. But as soon as I walked into the room, I knew something was different. The firm's 2 founding partners, Mr. Langston and Mr. Amir, were both seated, along with the new CEO and 2 board members. 5 chairs. 5 pairs of eyes. 1 copy of my recent strategy report printed and marked with notes. Camille, Mr. Amir said, we've reviewed your implementation models from Q2 and the cross-regional simulation you built with the Midwest team. He tapped the stack of pages. Your approach to sustainable growth, especially the predictive risk matrix, it's the kind of thinking this firm needs at the top. I felt my heart skip, but I stayed composed. Thank you, sir. We'd like to propose something, the CEO said. A new role. You'd oversee not just strategy for your division, but help craft firm-wide positioning for the upcoming restructure. I blinked. Are you offering me national strategy lead? Mr. Langston smiled. We're offering you a seat on the steering committee. Starting next quarter. My breath caught in my chest. They weren't just trusting me, they were building around me. When I left the room, I didn't call my parents. I didn't even tell Morgan. I called Grandma Vera. She answered on the 2nd ring. They offered me a leadership seat, I said, trying to stay calm. It's beyond anything I imagined. She didn't miss a beat. Of course they did. They finally see what you've always been. I smiled. It feels different this time. Not like I worked for it, more like I became it. That's because you did, she said. And it's about time the room noticed who they'd been ignoring. I hung up and sat in my car for a while, letting the moment settle. I thought about all the times I'd been told to wait. All the dinners where Morgan's stories filled the space while mine waited in the wings. And now they couldn't deny it. I had become undeniable. Not because I'd demanded a spotlight, but because I'd built a light so bright, it didn't need one. The next day, my face appeared in a leadership profile spread. It wasn't a glossy photo shoot. It was a candid picture, me in a meeting, mid-sentence, hands moving, fire in my eyes. The caption read, "The analyst who rewrote the room." For the first time in my life, the story had my name at the top and it stayed there. The ripple was immediate. My inbox filled with congratulatory messages from across departments, even from rival firms. But the most unexpected message came from someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Aunt Melinda, my mother's estranged older sister. Camille, she wrote, I've been following your career from afar. I want you to know your story has reached more people than you think. You're changing how the next generation sees strength. Quiet doesn't mean small. And you've proven that louder than any applause. I stared at the message for a long time. It wasn't just about recognition anymore. It was about how my refusal to be erased had started to echo beyond my family, beyond my firm. I wasn't just surviving, I was setting a new standard. That week, I was invited to mentor 2 junior analysts. When we met in a corner office, one of them, a sharp-eyed recent graduate named Elise, asked, "How did you know when it was time to stop being quiet?" I paused. The day I realized my silence wasn't protecting me, it was protecting their comfort. Elise nodded slowly, eyes wide. "I want to learn that too." I smiled. "Then you already have." I started walking differently through the office. Not faster. Not louder. Just taller. The same woman who used to second-guess every word in her email signature was now leading initiatives with multi-million-dollar implications. And the same family who once said "don't ruin this" at a party I paid for. They now sent updates from mutual friends, "Camille's doing so well," but I didn't need their reposts. Because I had already written the headline. It started with an unexpected voicemail. My mom's voice, lighter than usual but carefully rehearsed. "Hi sweetheart, we've been thinking, we'd love to host a dinner. Just us. Maybe this weekend? We miss you. Your father and I thought it'd be nice to reconnect." There was no mention of Morgan, no hint of guilt or manipulation, just an open invitation. I let the message sit for 2 days before responding. Not out of spite, but because I needed time to be sure I wasn't walking into another emotional ambush. I finally texted back. "Dinner is fine. One night. Just honesty, no performance." My mother replied within minutes. "Of course. Just us. We want to celebrate you properly this time." That sentence, "properly this time," stung more than it comforted. It made it clear they knew what they'd done before. They'd buried me in my own moment, and now, as the tide turned in my favor, they wanted to rewrite the narrative without owning the past. Still, a part of me, tired, but not bitter, agreed to show up. I wasn't going for them. I was going to mark the final chapter on my terms. I arrived at the house in a crisp white blouse, jeans, and low heels. No frills, no intention to impress, just clarity in human form. The front door opened before I even knocked. My dad stood there in a navy sweater, smiling like nothing had ever fractured. "Camille," he said, almost breathless. "You look." I nodded. "Thanks." My mother appeared behind him, wiping her hands on a towel, eyes scanning my face for any trace of tension. "We're so happy you came," she said. "Really?" I stepped inside. The house was clean, quiet, dimly lit with candles and soft jazz humming from the kitchen. The table was set for 3. No banners. No surprise guests. Just plates, silverware, and a bottle of wine I recognized. I'd bought it years ago and left it behind. We ate. For a while, it was ordinary. We talked about work, traffic, how the neighborhood had changed. But I could feel it coming, like thunder under dry clouds. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "Camille," he said, "we know we've made mistakes. Big ones. And we're not asking for anything, except a chance to rebuild." My mother placed her fork down gently. "We didn't realize how much we took you for granted. For so long, we just assumed you didn't need as much. That you were fine." I tilted my head. "Because I didn't ask." She hesitated. "Because you were strong. Always so composed." I leaned forward. Being quiet isn't the same as being okay. And being strong doesn't mean I didn't need support. You praised Morgan for needing help. And punished me for not asking for it. They didn't argue. They didn't deny it. That silence, awkward, heavy, was the first honest moment we'd shared in years. "We want to do better," my dad said finally. "We want to show you we can change." My mom nodded. "We even spoke to an estate lawyer. We made sure you're in the will." Equally. The words landed like a failed performance. "That's not what I needed," I said softly. "I didn't ask for equality in assets. I asked for equality in love. In visibility." I stood up slowly. "You don't get to buy your way into my life now that the rest of the world sees what you chose to ignore." My mother's face flushed. "We just wanted to fix things. Then start by being honest," I said. "Start by saying what you really regret." My father leaned back, his voice quieter now. "I regret not showing up for you when it mattered. I regret thinking your silence meant permission." I didn't say anything. I just nodded. Not in forgiveness, but in recognition. They were trying. Clumsily. Imperfectly. But they were trying. "I'm not asking for us to go back," I said as I grabbed my coat. "I'm just asking that if I stay, it has to be as me. Not as the version of me you preferred." I walked to the door, hand on the handle, and turned back once. "I'm not the backup plan. I'm not the reliable default. I'm Camille. And if that makes you uncomfortable, that's your work to do, not mine." I left without waiting for a response. The door didn't slam. It just clicked shut behind me, quietly, like a story ending on the final period. 3 Sundays later, I stood in my own kitchen, barefoot, coffee mug in hand, listening to Nina Simone hum softly from a Bluetooth speaker in the corner. My apartment smelled like lemon and honey. A plant I'd kept alive for almost a year now stood tall near the window, something small, but something mine. The morning light poured in through the blinds, and for the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for a phone call, a guilt trip, or a crisis disguised as conversation. There was no party to save, no spotlight to chase, no silence to swallow. There was only this, peace. And the quiet knowledge that I hadn't abandoned anyone, I'd simply returned to myself. I no longer felt the need to prove anything to anyone, least of all to the people who once said, "Don't ruin this," when I tried to speak the truth. They weren't my stage anymore. They weren't even in the audience. They were just part of the prologue. The opening act that made the main character realize the show must go on without applause. At work, things had shifted again. I'd recently been asked to keynote a regional women's leadership summit. Me, the girl who used to sit in back rows, taking notes and trying not to be noticed. The girl who once believed she had to earn her family's attention with accomplishments instead of simply existing as enough. Now, I stood in front of packed auditoriums. Not to show off, but to remind others that quiet strength is still strength. That invisibility isn't a personality, it's a condition imposed by people too loud to notice your light. One of the attendees, a young black woman named Kira, waited for me outside the venue. I just wanted to say, "You made me feel seen," she whispered, voice shaking. Like I don't have to wait for someone to finally choose me. I hugged her without hesitation. "You don't," I said. "You get to choose yourself. That's the only choice that lasts." Later that evening, I opened a journal I hadn't touched since the party, back when I thought I was being erased. I flipped to a blank page and wrote, in neat, steady handwriting, "I am not a placeholder. I am not someone's second option. I am not the one who waits her turn. I am the reason the table exists." Grandma Vera came by that weekend. She brought over an old family album I hadn't seen in years. We sat on my couch, flipping through faded pages and handwritten notes. "Do you ever regret not confronting them sooner?" I asked. She smiled softly. "No. Because I wouldn't have been ready. I think part of growing up is realizing silence doesn't make you noble, it makes you invisible. You had to walk through the fire to realize your own warmth." I looked at a photo of myself at 12, awkward, smiling too wide, standing just out of frame beside Morgan's birthday cake. "That girl," I whispered, "wanted so badly to be noticed." "And now?" Grandma asked. I closed the album and looked out the window. "Now she's noticed by the only person who matters, me." My grandmother gripped my hand, her voice warm. "You rewrote the story, Camille. And you did it without cruelty, without revenge. That's something not many people can do." I didn't need to say anything back. She already knew. Weeks later, I saw Morgan again. It wasn't planned. We ran into each other outside a bookstore near Grant Park. She looked different. Quieter. Not broken, but more self-aware. We talked for a bit about work, about grandma, about how strange it felt to move through adulthood without a script. As we said goodbye, she paused and asked, "Do you think we'll ever be close again?" I thought about it. Not out of bitterness, but out of truth. "I think we'll always be sisters," I said. "But closeness, that comes from repair, not just time." She nodded. "I'll keep trying," she said. "That's all anyone can do," I replied. I walked away, not with weight on my shoulders, but with wings. Because this time, I didn't need her to follow. I had already found my path. So if you ask me now, what happened after the MIC drop, the confrontation, the awkward brunches, and the overdue apologies? Here's the answer. I didn't get revenge. I didn't get a perfect family. I got something better. I got peace. I got clarity. I got to build a life that doesn't hinge on anyone else seeing my value. And I got to look at that little girl in the photo and whisper, "We made it. We're no longer waiting to be chosen. We already chose ourselves." The end.